So, Dr. Blecher, are you ready? Yes, the first of our two doctors. Come on out here.
Let me tell you what a cannabis user looks like to me. A good friend of mine has a mother who lives in a nursing home. Some time ago, he reached out to me and told me that she had started screaming. It's now almost nonstop, night and day, 24 hours. It's incredibly distressing to her caregivers, to his family, and to the doctors that are looking after her care. Their solution is to just increase all her medications. They've upped her sedatives, they've added antidepressants, they've added now strong opiates, and they've added, most recently, antipsychotics. It's done nothing for her screaming, and in fact, it's made her worse, because now she's so sedated and delirious that she's not recognizing her family. So my friend asked me if I thought perhaps cannabis might help her. I signed her up for a license, I made him the caregiver, and a few days later, he calls me back. He says, "Peter, you won't believe what happened. A few hours after giving my mom that first dose of oil, she stopped screaming. It settled down." In fact, he called me a few weeks later in follow-up and said that process had continued. So much so that they had now been able to wean her off much of her sedating medication that was patently making her worse. And she was now recognizing family, she was smiling. Just a great story, right? But here's the crazy part. The nursing home is refusing to give her the medicine that's helping her. They're more than willing to give her the heavy sedating medicines that factually made her worse. The cannabis oil has to be locked in a box by her bed, and only the family can access that. They have to come and see her several times a day, taking turns to give her the medicine. The nursing home is essentially denying her access to the medicine that's helping her. That's what a cannabis user looks like to me. My name is Peter Blecher. I'm a medical director at CPM Center for Pain Management and chief medical officer of Starseed Medicinal. Thank you for coming out and hearing me talk today at IdeaCity. Even just 5 years ago, the chance of a friend of mine, a Bay Street executive, calling me up and essentially asking me to procure medical weed for his mom would have been essentially unthinkable just from the social stigma alone. But now I have a practice filled with grandmothers, police officers, accountants, laborers, school teachers, all of whom are benefiting from medical cannabis. And the thing is, almost none of them had tried it before. These are not recreational users. They're not looking to become intoxicated. They're looking to get better. Today, I'm going to tell you about my experience on the front line of the opiate epidemic and now how that has helped shape and change my view of cannabis. If there's one overarching message I want to get across to you all here today is we need to stop conflating the recreational use of this plant with its long-observed medicinal benefits. If insurers, employers, my fellow physicians, and all of you here today fail to see that distinction, you will miss out on a potentially life-changing and life-saving opportunities that this plant can afford. We are indeed on the front edge of a cannabis revolution. But this is not just a revolution about pot or weed or whatever slang term you want to apply. It's also a medical revolution. Medical cannabis is changing the way we're managing pain, helping get people off opiates, and helping patients manage a variety of symptoms. I'd like to tell you my cannabis story. I need to go back a few years. Yes, that's me in that mugshot up there. A couple of gray hairs ago, I like to think I earned them, all of them. I'm a 25-year veteran emergency physician working in busy ERs in the urban environment. I've seen a lot in my time. You have to understand that almost every patient who comes to the ER does so with undifferentiated pain. It's our role to choose the right investigations and tests to hopefully ultimately come to a correct diagnosis. But notwithstanding us making the right diagnosis, hopefully most of the time, many times patients are discharged back into the community still in pain. Chronic pain is a big thing. It's sometimes referred to as the silent epidemic. 1 in 5 Canadians, 20%, that's millions of people, suffer from chronic pain. And it's this understanding and recognition that led me about 15 years ago to decide that I wanted to help people manage chronic pain as well. In the type of clinic where I work, we use a number of modalities to help these patients, things like nerve blocks, infusion treatments, Botox for spasticity or migraine, patient self-directed techniques like CBT or mindfulness. And we also use pharmacotherapy when needed that might include opiates for limited periods of time now. Of course, opiates, they changed medicine. They changed the way we manage trauma in the field, do procedures, do surgeries. They work great for acute pain, but something changed in the late 90s, early 2000s, when suddenly we, physicians, were being told by manufacturers that now they were safe for chronic pain as well. This was different. So many of us, with the best of intentions, started prescribing these more liberally. Most of us, I would say. And in fact, things looked good in the beginning. Patients got better. Their pain went down. Their quality of life went up. Their families felt better. We felt better. But what happened is over time, we started noticing, even with increasing doses, because they were developing tolerance, not only did their pain not continue to resolve, it actually got worse, paradoxically. It had an opposing effect. Some of us began thinking that perhaps we didn't know enough about the long-term effect of opiates. But of course, at that time, the horse was out of the barn. The opiate crisis was upon us, and my goodness, absolutely tragic and incredible. The statistics are staggering. So much so that the Ontario and Canadian Medical Associations both have been aggressively lobbying physicians now for the past several years to curb and significantly reduce their opiate prescribing. And here's how well that's been working out. Not at all. Horribly. For the last 2 years that we have complete data, comparing 2016 to 17, opiate deaths went up again by almost half. We're now at a point where for the first time in recorded human history, since we climbed out of the trees and lit a fire, accidents are no longer the leading cause of death in those under 50. Drug overdoses. The opiate epidemic is costing billions of dollars, and it's killing tens of thousands of our youth in North America. So it was on the back of this that I realized that I had to do something different. I had to look at this differently. I'd had patients come to me on ad hoc basis in dribs and drabs telling me they were using cannabis to manage their pain. Some had gotten off opiates, some had reduced their opiate use, others had never even used opiates. I started conservatively using synthetic cannabinoids at first on some of my most challenging patients, and I saw that I was able to reduce their opiate use. Some of them I got off completely. As I got more comfortable, learned more, I got more confident in prescribing licenses for whole plant extracts, mostly oils, but for some also vaporizing dried flower. It's very important to acknowledge that this has always been a patient-led initiative. And this is part of the reason that so many of my colleagues are very reluctant to embrace it, because doctors do not like to be told what to do, and least of all, we don't like to be told what to do by patients. But there's no question that it's this collective advocacy that has led us to the point where we now truly are on a scientific and medical frontier. Do we need more data? Well, of course we do. We need more robust trials. We need to better understand the impact of medical cannabis. We need better delivery mechanisms so we can better understand potency and dosing. And we need for the media and my medical colleagues to stop conflating medical and recreational use. We have to understand that not all cannabis will get you high. Cannabis contains cannabinoids. Those are the active ingredients. They work on receptors in our brains and our body. The two most important medically ones are THC, which can get you high, and CBD, which will not. We also make cannabinoid receptors in our body, and we make cannabinoids. We call those endocannabinoids. They act on the same receptors in the plants. And we have evolved to do this for over 500 million years. Yes, that thing floating around behind me that you've been wondering for 30 seconds what is, that's a sea sponge. The sea sponge, in its primitive, basic central nervous system, has an endocannabinoid system and receptors. We would never have evolutionarily conserved this if it was not so vitally important to so much of our function. The way we process pain and inflammation, memory consolidation, bone formation, appetite control, just to name a few. The sea sponge evolved these receptors 500 million years before the cannabis plant ever appeared on Earth. And I seriously doubt they did so with the intent someday to roll a joint and light it on fire. They can't, they have no thumbs. So is cannabis safe? Let me throw this stat at you. It would take 1,500 pounds of cannabis to be smoked in 15 minutes to induce a lethal dose. 1,500 pounds. I suspect that's a challenge that might even overwhelm Snoop Dogg or Seth Rogen, but I'm equally confident they'd be more than willing to accept the challenge. But on a more serious note, perhaps this is why we have never seen an actual cannabis overdose death. It's never been reported in the medical literature. Now, let me be abundantly clear. You can absolutely become acutely intoxicated on cannabis, and you will lose judgment, you will lose mentation, cognitive function, and you will lose coordination. And if you're engaged in a dangerous activity, like driving a car while high, you can get seriously injured or kill yourself. But you can abuse or become addicted to virtually any drug. Take Gravol, Benadryl, and Tylenol. I've seen overdose deaths from all of those in my years. Every busy urban ER sees that. We sell those in corner stores. We sell them to minors. Should we ban those drugs? Well, of course not. Those are great drugs when used appropriately for the conditions they're indicated in the way they're supposed to be used. I believe that medical cannabis as well, when used appropriately in a medically supervised program, can help patients manage a number of symptoms and ailments. Overwhelmingly, those patients who experience bad reactions with cannabis, such as addiction or significant side effects, are specifically using it in order to achieve intoxication. Every time they use cannabis, they are using as much as they need to become intoxicated. That's their endpoint. Medical patients, true medical patients, are doing the opposite. They're using as little as they need to manage their symptoms with the specific endpoint of not wanting to become intoxicated. That's very different. Perhaps the one area where we've shown most strong evidence of efficacy for cannabis is in its opiate-sparing effects. Just last month, JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, published data that now unequivocally shows that in every US jurisdiction, every state where there's a medical legal framework in place, opiate use and prescribing has gone down. Every state. To the tune of 2 million annualized prescriptions. If this was to become a national phenomenon, it's felt that this would translate into a reduced drugs expenditure of $4.5 billion. These are significant, big data numbers, and it shows that we're moving in the right direction. I'd now like to take just a few minutes and tell you how it is I came to become involved with a medical cannabis company that had a very unique business case. The name of that company, of which I'm also one of the founders, is called Starseed Medicinal. Starseed is the first and only medical cannabis company to have as its strategic partner a major construction union and its insurers, who together have agreed to put medical cannabis on the benefit plan and provide it for all of its members as a covered health benefit. The name of that union is called LIUNA, or Labor's International Union of North America. LIUNA is the largest construction union in Canada, with over 120,000 members. As you can well imagine, due to the nature of the work in construction, they over-index for chronic pain, and as a consequence for opiate use as well, and all that that entails. Remember I told you the stat about 1 in 5 Canadians suffering from chronic pain? Well, construction workers over-index above that threshold by 32% just for back pain alone. I have to tell you that I believe it was incredibly brave for the LIUNA leadership to stand up when they did, now 3-4 years ago, and publicly declare their belief that cannabis was the future and their way to combat the opiate crisis, help manage chronic pain for its members better, and reduce the chance of addiction. This is not about construction workers getting stoned. This is about helping all injured workers find relief, reduce their dependency on opiates, improve their quality of life, and suppress addiction. As a consequence of the work that I'm now doing with LIUNA and Starseed, I get invited a lot to speak to large employer groups, insurers, plan sponsors, to talk about medical cannabis in the workplace. And the first thing they always ask me is, well, what are we going to do if we put medical cannabis on our benefit plan and someone shows up stoned? It's a very good question, and I answer it usually with another question. What are you doing right now if someone shows up drunk? I would handle it exactly the same way. What are you doing right now with the accountant who's crushing Percocets on his desk and snorting them? Percocets that are covered right now on all of your benefit plans. What are you doing with the laborers, the factory workers who are rolling fentanyl patches in the parking lot during coffee break and smoking them and going back and operating safety-sensitive machinery? Fentanyl patches that right now are being covered on your benefit plans. Usually the room goes silent. This is about using CBD-predominant formulations that patently have now demonstrated to suppress and divert the use of these drugs that are just so much more sedating. And they're tacitly approved for daytime use because they're on the drug plans. THC-predominant formulas should be reserved for nighttime, evening, after-hours work. Remember the stats I told you from the US and my friend's mother. We can see how this is working. If we're going to have an honest conversation about workplace safety, drug use at work, and pain management, let's at least park the hypocrisy and have an honest, balanced conversation. So what does the future hold? As we all heard, we're now going to be legalizing the adult use recreational market on October 17th. And I think that's good. It's going to help remove the stigma from medical cannabis and separate it out to be its own thing, as I said we needed to do. And that's also good. Those patients who perhaps all along were using it more for enjoyment or relaxation, the same way that some might enjoy a glass of wine, will now be able to do so without the fear of breaking the law. And that's also good. But let's be very clear that the future of cannabis as medicine lies in the insights that we're going to gain from further research and discovery. Some companies are developing tamper-resistant devices with cloud-based control that allows physician to deliver microdosing, even of THC, yes, THC, that improves alertness and cognitive function because it's reducing pain and anxiety and inflammation. And it's virtually impossible to become intoxicated. Other companies are looking at discoveries and new advances in neuroscience to look at our endocannabinoid system and using CBD to help manage things like concussion, CTE, and even Alzheimer's disease. So if I can leave you with this one final thought today, here at IdeaCity, it's this. While the pending legalization of the adult recreational market is grabbing plenty of headlines, let's not forget about the millions of pain patients and sufferers who could benefit from medical cannabis and help suppress the opiate crisis and divert opioids in Canada. Patients are not looking to get high, they're looking to get well. Thank you.
That was excellent, Peter.
Thanks, Moses.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on this question of euphoria until this moment, and for the period of time between the moment when the Supreme Court of Canada legalized medical marijuana, and today one could characterize the situation in Canada this way. If you were in serious pain and you could prove that none of the usual pharmaceutical-based drugs worked for you or that they had very deleterious knock-on effects, with great reluctance, the government of Canada would allow you to have medical marijuana. But if, God forbid, you should enjoy yourself, they threw you in jail. And my question is this: if you're in intractable pain, if you're on your way to dying, if you're suffering from cancer, and if there is this thing which can take your mind away for even a half hour, why would we begrudge that? Isn't in that circumstance euphoria part of a cure?
I couldn't agree with you more. And you know, we're talking about, in that scenario, we're talking about comfort care. And I think, I mean, and let's be very clear, I have no judgment on recreational use of cannabis either. I just think, as I said, we shouldn't be conflating it with the medical use of cannabis to manage symptoms for people that are trying to have active lives and be at work. Because there's this constant issue now about the fear of everyone showing up stoned at work, but yet I know, because I've seen it firsthand, the abuse of opiates in the workplace. I think that using cannabis in palliative care, much like we use opiates in palliative care, there's no issue with that. And I think that those are obviously humane things to do. And I also think recreational cannabis has a place. I mean, look, I enjoy a glass of wine. I'm the first to admit that as a societal scourge, alcohol is much worse than cannabis has ever been. So I don't think we should judge that, but I think we just need to separate out the two and allow for recreational use of cannabis, and let's push on with this exciting frontier of cannabinoids in medicine, which is what Starseed is engaged in. That's our focus.
Good work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you.
Oh, good.